Hello and welcome to Follow the Money. I'm Robert Tan. Join us as we explore the tools and insights you need to jumpstart your financial journey. As the Marcos government tries to boost efficiency with its ongoing cabinet revamp, many are asking if the move will strengthen investor confidence or raise concerns abroad. Giving us an international perspective on how the cabinet reshuffle is perceived by foreign investors is the Executive Director and Trustee of the British Chamber of Commerce, Philippines, Chris Nelson. Welcome to Follow the Money, Chris. Good morning from Portugal.
Thank you. Good morning from Portugal and good afternoon to everybody in the Philippines. And thank you very much for the invitation.
How are you today?
Very well, thank you. And I think also here in Madeira, it's a lot cooler than I believe everybody is having the weather in the Philippines.
So, yes, it's very hot here. And I guess we have to start the conversation on a pretty hot topic. Now, we'd just like to get your thoughts on the government reorganization under the Marcos administration. What are your thoughts on this?
So look, I mean, first of all, it's quite usual for presidents, and if you make a comparison, as others have done, with the private sector, for the chief executive to make changes. Obviously, President Marcos has approximately another 3 years, and he clearly wants to drive further results. So that's kind of understandable and not unexpected. And in that context, we understand, because what we're looking for, if I make the general point, is to further enhance the economy, and specifically, obviously, for the British Chamber of Commerce, see further growth of trade between the two countries. So I think in terms of overall, Robert, him revamping his cabinet at this halfway stage is understandable. And obviously what we're looking for is both continuity and how we can get key legislation passed.
Now, looking at the revamp, the president has retained the economic managers. Was this a good idea? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think it is. First of all, we have worked closely with a number of those cabinet secretaries. We've had meetings when I was back in the Philippines with Secretary Recto, with also the DTI Secretary Roque, and also, of course, the NEDA Secretary Balasacan. So, yes, I mean, we've had very good interactions with all of those economic managers. I think also, if you see some of the key successes, one of the challenges to the Philippines has been inflation. And inflation is coming down. And one has to give significant credit to Secretary Recto and others involved in that. And also their commitment to continue, and I believe, to open the economy, to get further foreign direct investment. Therefore, I think for the markets, for chambers of commerce, such as the British Chamber of Commerce, retaining those key economic managers, including the budget secretary and others, is a very important matter.
Now, looking at that, how do you think this could affect the optimism of foreign investors in the Philippines right now?
Well, look, I think the key for foreign investors in the Philippines is what are the actions that the government is going to do in the next, which is the 20th Congress. Now, specifically for the British Chamber of Commerce, we have been looking at the following key legislation, which also is priority legislation. That is the Cybersecurity Act, the E-Governance Act, and the Open Transmission Act. And I would also like to go back and, herald and congratulate the previous administration on the passing of such acts as the Anti-Agricultural Sabotage Act. These are ones that we strongly supported. Why do I think this is important? I think this is important because it continues to reassure investors that the Philippines is moving forward. Cybersecurity is a critical area. It's very critical. You can see that in the UK. The UK has suffered, some of the major retailers there have suffered from cyber attacks. So passing the Cybersecurity Act will certainly strengthen the country. E-governance and trying to do things which will actually move business, because actually the ease of doing business, and we're an art to champion, is very important. And finally, open transmission. Everything is going much more digital, and we want to see that. So It's about passing legislation, it's about moving the economy and getting the growth rate up to 6% or more.
Chris, you've been here for quite some time now, have seen several presidents, looking at the economy from the start. Do you see any changes in what you were mentioning about the ease of doing business here in the Philippines, especially for, if we focus on the British Chamber of Commerce, the British investors who want to look at the Philippines as one of the places to invest in?
I think there has been improvements, and all credit in those contexts. And as I mentioned, we're an ARTA champion. We work closely with Attorney Perez, who heads ARTA, and we know that they're working extremely hard, but much more can be done. What we're looking for is how can the national government, local governments facilitate doing business in the most easiest way possible. And that's why things like the E-Governance Act is very important. Digitization is very important. Anything that could speed up the process, reduce the number of days, reduce the paperwork and administration involved. So I think there is definitely improvements. But of course, also we have to be fully aware, Robert, that the Philippines is not operating in isolation. You're competing against other countries in Southeast Asia, and therefore we have to keep pushing forward. One of our mantras at the British Chamber is, please come and invest in the Philippines. It's a very important market. It's close to 120 million people, very well educated, great opportunities in both in the consumer market, obviously in renewable energies and infrastructure, but at the same time as a gateway to Southeast Asia. But in that context, we have to keep moving forward on liberalizing the economy.
But how do British investors look at what's happening right now? Are they cautious, or are we looking at more British investors coming into the Philippines and setting up shop here?
Well, I think there's always great opportunities for Philippine investors to come. I'd just like to highlight that next month, 27th of June, in London, we'll have a PESA investment forum, and PESA will be having different meetings. So the PESA forum is being hosted at HSBC's offices in Canary Wharf. And I know they're also looking to work with other people, other opportunities. They're hoping to actually be involved. And let's not forget, there are Philippine banks also in London. You have BDO, we have the Philippine National Bank there. So this is a great opportunity. UK companies are looking at opportunities in Southeast Asia in a context, and we have to look at the macro developments in the world. Obviously, everybody's being shaped by what's happening on Trump and the tariffs, and therefore also we're at growth opportunities. Let's not forget the Philippines GDP growth, while below analysts' expectations at about, I think it was 5.4, is still very high relative to the world, and I think second highest in Asia. And if you compare that to the UK, where the economy barely grew. So UK companies will be looking at the Philippines and Asia in ways where they can do possible trade and investment.
Now, talking about tariffs, on another note, former U.S. President Donald Trump said that he will delay imposing his proposed 50% tariff on the European Union until July. Now, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, I think, first of all, number one, I think doing trade negotiations is very complex and generally extremely time-consuming. Based upon my understanding, it takes 2 to 3 years to actually negotiate a trade agreement. So first of all, here you have a very short time period. Now, the next part about this is it's good to see that there has been a delay. I think the EU is clear that it wants to make an arrangement with the US. But I think also what this whole discussion on tariffs is doing, and let's be very clear, as a Chamber of Commerce, we want free trade across the world. What I think it's doing, it's looking at opportunities in other areas. And let me just emphasize one now. So the Philippines has signaled that it's planning to join a trading bloc called CTPPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That includes also already the UK. Now, let's not forget the Philippines is also part of RCEP, which is the Regional Economic Comprehensive Partnership. Now, there are opportunities, and I think if the Philippines is able to join CPTP, another trading bloc, that will be a great advantage to it. Because the real issue with the tariffs that are coming out from the US is uncertainty.
Now,
number one, when
yes.
you run a, sorry, Robert,
Go ahead,
the
go
reason
ahead.
I just want to make this point
Yes, go ahead.
is that companies' number one issue in any is always planning and trying to plan in the best circumstances. What these tariffs create is uncertainty, and that makes planning very hard, which makes investment hard, which generally has a negative impact. So my point is, I think all congratulations to the Department of Trade and Industry, and I know to the Secretary Roque and Undersecretary and Deputy for moving ahead, and joining CPTP will be, I believe, a great boost and a great boost to UK and Philippines trade going forward.
Now, looking at that, how do you think this could actually affect global trade operations as a whole?
The tariffs.
Yes.
Well, the tariffs in general are, it's obviously a negative impact. I mean, tariffs, first of all, what will happen, of course, is that tariffs raise the price of imported goods. What we all know is that the supply chain across the world now is more globally linked than it's ever been. So, in terms of that, it will potentially raise inflation. It raises potentially a negative in terms of growth rates. So actually, the worst thing you try and achieve, which I believe occurred in the 1970s, is what they call stagflation, where your economy is stagnating, but you still have inflation. That makes it very difficult for central banks. And let's not bring it back to the point I raised at the beginning of our discussion, where I gave a lot of credit to the economic managers of bringing down inflation. Inflation has been what central banks across the world have been trying to work against. And if you can see it, it meant that the Bank of England has reduced its rates. Banco Central in the Philippines has reduced its rates. And the central bank governor has signaled the potential for 2 further rate cuts in the Philippines. So tariffs and the dislocation of tariffs can have long-term impact. So no, tariffs actually, a raising of tariffs is overall a negative for economies. And if you look at how the world has come together, we have exceeding trading blocks, which is why the EU, why having further trading agreements such as RCEP and CPTP is so critically important for the Philippines. And I would say all credit and good luck with the Philippines application to CPTP,
Yes.
and I'm sure it will be successful.
Chris, hold that thought. We're just getting started. Follow the Money returns after a short break. Welcome back to Follow the Money. We're still discussing shifting gears with Chris Nelson of the British Chamber of Commerce Philippines. Welcome back, Chris. Let's continue on that note. We were talking about the effects of tariffs. I'd just like to continue in terms of now looking at what the EU is doing in terms of negotiating with the US. Do you see the same thing happening here in Asia, strengthening more trade ties here in Asia with Philippines and the other countries?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you look at, so first of all, the EU and the Philippines is currently negotiating a free trade agreement. But let me just bring that back into context of what's happening on tariffs. Free trade agreements generally are, based on my understanding, a 3-year process. It's a very long, complex, you're covering a whole range of items. And it requires a lot of effort, and you need obviously highly qualified people involved doing, who are very conscious of these key points. So, number one, I believe that the EU is negotiating with the Philippines for a free trade agreement, and that will, I'm sure, will happen. In addition, let me talk about specifically the UK, because obviously the UK is not part of the EU now. But however, the relationships between the UK and the Philippines was raised to what they call a Joint Economic Committee, JETCO, and they had their first meeting in March this year, which further shows an increase in the trading relationship in the UK and the Philippines. Already, the trade is up to about £3 billion per year across the two countries. And this further reinforces opportunities, which is why when we were discussing the earlier part of the interview, CPTP will only further enhance that. And let's not forget, coming up, I believe we're entering now to the 80th year between diplomatic relationships between the UK and the Philippines. So, in summary, I think the EU, the UK will continue to look for further trading opportunities. And I think the Philippines, taking that opportunity, will strengthen its ties, because what Tariffs has done is to say to companies, okay, how can we plan going forward? And then let's not forget, one of the first things that the Trump administration did was to actually look at the NAFTA agreement, which is the one between Canada and Mexico, which had been negotiated in the previous Trump administration. So what I'm trying to make the point here is that while it's important to reset, and we hope that the EU and the US government will come to an agreement shortly, at the same time, I think it's behoven of everybody to look at what other opportunities they have. And I believe in specifically UK Philippines has a great opportunity with CPTP. And I think the EU will also look to strengthen its ties, as I know, with the Philippines and with other trading blocs.
Now, Chris, you were mentioning that one of the goals of the British Chamber of Commerce is to do free trade. Now, looking at this, there's a study by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies revealing that the country could benefit from Trump's tariffs, but it noted that certain reforms must be implemented to take advantage of these opportunities. Now, do you agree with this, or what are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, I think there are always opportunities. I mean, if you look at, obviously, the Philippines, and I think you showed a picture of President Trump when he was showing his board. And the Philippines, it's quite hard to understand exactly the rate. I think it's 17% to 18%. And that's because the trade balance in the Philippines' favor is about $4 billion. Now, are there opportunities in the Philippines? Yes, there are. It will require, of course, continuing to upscale workers to see what benefits they can bring. But the key here is that you have a stable agreement. So for me, the Philippines needs to look at the opportunities it can do, both with ASEAN, that's with RCEP, with CPTP, which is a much bigger, larger trading bloc that includes, as I understand, Japan, it includes the UK, and to look further at areas such as JETCO, how we can raise specifically. So are there opportunities? Yes, definitely. But I think what the Philippines will be doing, and I think that's going to happen, is to look at where else can I strengthen my opportunities for trade and investment, and do that, because that is a more diversified approach, and it will strengthen the overall economy in a better way.
Now, in line with what you were mentioning of looking for opportunities, now, what kind of reforms do you think the country should implement in order to take advantage of these opportunities that are created by Trump's tariffs?
Well, look, in terms of overall, what we'd like to see is a further liberalization of the economy. We've seen that actually, but there are still some economic barriers. I mean, to be very clear and fair to the Philippines, now you can invest 100% in renewable energy. We'd like to obviously see much widening of foreign direct investment opportunities in the Philippines. That would obviously cover all companies. And at the same time, bring down those ease of doing business. And that's very hard to become into specifics. But I know that when we used to do trade missions to the UK, the number one question of SMEs and MSMEs who we were dealing with, small to medium-sized enterprises, is how easy it for me to set up, how easy it for me to engage, what's the issue in terms of government. So e-governance, as we've discussed in the earlier part of the program, anything we can do to strengthen that area of digitalization approvals is critically important.
Now, you mentioned MSMEs. Now, how is this affecting the smaller businesses?
You mean in terms of
the tariffs,
or
what's happening around the world in terms of the negotiations happening with each country, like the EU, the UK, and here in Asia? For instance, the president just came from the 46th ASEAN Summit and had related meetings. Now, what do you think the country can gain from this, and what can we learn from that to help boost the country's foreign investments?
Look, I think, first of all, any company, small to medium size, or even large, which is doing significant export business to the US, will obviously have to be rethinking the way going forward. I mean, if you look at certain announcements for Anchor specifically, I believe it was Diageo, who are one of our key members, they have a significant business supplying the US, and they had to obviously put when they did a large multinationals obviously have the financial capability to now redirect, to see what they can do. But for small to medium-sized business, that's a much bigger challenge. As I've said at the very beginning, certainty, which is always difficult in business, is the one thing you try to drive for. So I think small to medium-sized enterprises will be looking at, where can I create a basis? Now, for example, the UK and the EU have just had discussions and are starting to increase, I mean, not going back to obviously being a member of the EU, but further increasing already very close relationships between the UK and the EU. Now, if I come specifically to the Philippines, I think there's opportunities both ways. Let's not forget, for Philippine companies to do business in the UK, they can benefit under the Developing Countries Tariff Scheme, DCTS, and over 90% are actually tariff-free. So, great opportunities.
Chris,
Sorry,
we're kind of
Robert.
pressed for time. Just as the last question, now, are you optimistic? How do you see the next couple of months in terms of how the economy is going to be? What kind of strategic partnerships are going to happen in the months to come? And how do you see it here in the Philippines, on a final note?
My final note is this. First of all, I am very optimistic. I've seen growth and development. I'm very happy to see that we've got the PESA investment mission going on in London next month. As I mentioned, the forum will be on the 27th of June, hosted, as I said, by HSBC. I also very clear that during those times, I had a lot of discussions with the Director General of PESA, obviously Thea Panga, and they're looking to have very B2B, meeting different companies, and that may be supported by some of the other banks, which I've mentioned there in London, such as BDO and the Philippine National Bank. I also want to say that I see a lot of optimism, and I'd like to just also commend the efforts on bringing down inflation. I think the reduction in tariff interest rates is a very good move, so all credit to Banco Central. And let's try to get the Philippine growth rate back at above 6%. Having Secretary Recto, Roque, Balasacan, and obviously the Budget Secretary back, I think that's a very good statement. We want to see continuity, and we'd like to see key legislation passed.
On that note, thank you very much, Chris, for joining us today and giving your insights and giving us education on what needs to be done to push forward in terms of what's happening around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
Robert, it's my pleasure, and thank you very much indeed. And to everybody in the Philippines, I wish you a very good rest of the day, and good morning here from Madeira in Portugal.
Okay, thank you. That was British Chamber of Commerce Philippines Executive Chairman and Trustee Chris Nelson. Thank you. Now, before we go, another POV on the subject from University of Oxford professor Sir Paul Collier. Good government is not just about spending less, but spending wisely. Stability and credibility in governance are the foundations of sustained investment. And that's it for today's edition of Follow the Money. I'm Robert Tan. Thanks for watching. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel, always on top.